A nation on the brink. The war was not born in a single moment, it was forged in decades of silence, fury, and compromise. Before the thunder of cannons, before the clash of blue and gray, there was silence. A silence filled with tension, with fear, with the weight of a nation on the edge of collapse. The long road to war. The year is 1850, and the United States is a country divided, not by borders, but by belief. In the North, the Industrial Revolution is in full swing. Steam engines roar, factories hum, and railroads stretch across the land. Cities grow, and with them, a rising chorus of voices calling for the end of slavery. Newspapers print fiery editorials. Churches preach abolition. Activists like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Beecher Stowe stir the conscience of a nation. In the South, cotton is king. Vast plantations stretch to the horizon, worked by millions of enslaved men, women, and children. The economy thrives, but at a human cost. Southern leaders defend slavery not just as a necessity, but as a moral good. They see abolitionism as a threat to their way of life, their wealth, and their identity. Every new state added to the Union becomes a battlefield of ideology. Will it be free? Or slave? Congress tries to hold the country together with fragile compromises. The Missouri Compromise, 1820, draws a line across the map, free states above, slave states below. The Compromise of 1850 admits California as a free state but strengthens the Fugitive Slave Act, forcing Northerners to return escaped slaves. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, 1854, lets settlers vote on slavery, leading to bloodshed in the plains. In Kansas, neighbors turn rifles on each other. In Congress, Senator Charles Sumner is beaten nearly to death on the Senate floor. The nation is cracking. Then comes 1859. A man named John Brown leads a raid on Harper's Ferry, hoping to spark a slave uprising. He fails. He's hanged. But the South sees a warning: the North will not stay silent. The election that shattered the Union. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln is elected president. He's calm, thoughtful, and determined. But he wins without a single Southern electoral vote. To the South, Lincoln's victory is a death knell. They believe he will destroy their way of life. On December 20, 1860, South Carolina secedes. Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas follow. They form the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as president. Lincoln, still not yet inaugurated, watches the Union unravel. The first shot, Fort Sumter. April 12 to 13, 1861. Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. Fort Sumter is a lonely outpost in Charleston Harbor, held by Union Major Robert Anderson. The Confederacy demands surrender. Lincoln refuses. At 4:30 a.m., on April 12, Confederate cannons open fire. The sky erupts. The war begins. Inside the fort, Anderson's men hold out for 34 hours. They're low on food, low on ammunition. The walls shake. The air fills with smoke. On April 13, Anderson surrenders. No one dies in the battle, but tragedy strikes during a ceremonial salute. A cannon misfires. Private Daniel Huff, a Union soldier, is killed instantly. Another man is mortally wounded. So while Fort Sumter is often remembered as bloodless, the truth is more solemn. Union casualties: 1 killed, accidental, 1 mortally wounded. Confederate casualties: none. The first death of the Civil War came not from battle, but from ceremony, a grim omen of the devastation to come. Lincoln calls for 75,000 volunteers. The South responds with fury. Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee secede. The map is drawn. The lines are set. The blood will follow. The war begins. The American Civil War lasted 4 years. It will claim over 620,000 lives. It will tear families apart, burn cities to the ground, and reshape the soul of a nation. It will be fought in forests and fields, in towns and trenches, on rivers and railroads. It will be a war of brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor, state against state. It will be a war of courage, cruelty, sacrifice, and sorrow. And it all began here, with a single shot over Charleston Harbor, the first clash, the Battle of Philippi. Date: June 3, 1861. Location: Philippi, Western Virginia, now West Virginia. Time of battle: began at dawn, around 4 a.m. Result: Union victory. The sun had barely risen over the hills of Western Virginia when the first true clash of the Civil War echoed through the valley. It was June 3, 1861. The town of Philippi slept beneath a blanket of fog. But war does not wait for daylight. The setup. After the firing on Fort Sumter, both the Union and the Confederacy scrambled to secure strategic territory. Western Virginia was a region of divided loyalties, mountainous, rugged, and politically fractured. The Union wanted to hold it. The Confederacy wanted to claim it. A small Confederate force of about 800 men, mostly raw recruits from Virginia and Kentucky, had taken position in the town of Philippi. They were poorly armed, poorly trained, and poorly led. Their commander, Colonel George A. Porterfield, had little experience and even less support. The Union, under Brigadier General Thomas A. Morris, planned a surprise attack. 2 columns of Union troops, about 3,000 men, would converge on Philippi from different directions in a classic pincer movement. The goal: crush the Confederate force and secure the region. The battle begins. At 4 a.m., under the cover of darkness and rain, Union forces launched their assault. The Confederates were caught completely off guard. Many were still asleep in tents. Some were without shoes. The Union artillery opened fire, and chaos erupted. The Confederate lines collapsed almost immediately. Soldiers fled through the streets, some in their nightclothes. The retreat was so hasty and disorganized that the battle became known as the Philippi Races. Despite the confusion, a few Confederate soldiers made a stand near the covered bridge at the edge of town. But it was too little, too late. By sunrise, the Union had taken Philippi. Casualties. Though the battle was brief, it marked the first bloodshed on land in the Civil War. Union casualties: 4 wounded. Confederate casualties: 1 killed, 4 wounded, dozens captured. One of the wounded Confederates, James E. Hanger, lost a leg to a cannonball. He would later become famous for inventing the first modern prosthetic limb, founding the Hanger Orthopedic Group, a legacy born from pain. Aftermath. The Union's victory at Philippi was strategically minor, but symbolically massive. It proved that the North could mobilize quickly and strike decisively. It also emboldened Union leaders to push deeper into Western Virginia. For the Confederacy, the defeat was humiliating. Porterfield's command was disbanded. The loss exposed the South's lack of preparation and coordination in the early days of the war. Philippi also helped pave the way for West Virginia's eventual secession from Virginia and its admission to the Union in 1863. Historical impact. First land battle of the Civil War. First amputee of the war, James Hanger. First Union victory on land. First use of coordinated columns in Union tactics. Though small in scale, Philippi was the first step on a long, bloody road. It showed that the war would not be won by speeches or proclamations. It would be won, or lost, by men in the mud, under fire, in places like this. Philippi was a whisper compared to the roar that would come. But it was the beginning. The first clash. The first retreat. The first wound. And the first grave. Chapter 2, The Misfire, the Battle of Big Bethel. The first real test of Union arms, and a lesson in chaos. Date: June 10, 1861. Location: near Hampton, Virginia, on the Virginia Peninsula. Time of battle: began at dawn, around 5 a.m. Result: Confederate victory. The fog of war is not just a metaphor, it is real. It rolls across fields and rivers, blinding commanders, confusing soldiers, and turning plans into disasters. At Big Bethel, the fog was literal. And it swallowed the Union's first major offensive. The setup. After the Union's success at Philippi, General Benjamin F. Butler, commanding Union forces at Fort Monroe, grew confident. He wanted to strike deeper into Confederate-held Virginia and push toward Richmond. Confederate Colonel John B. Magruder, a flamboyant veteran of the Mexican War, had fortified positions at Big Bethel Church and Little Bethel, just miles from Union camps. His goal: provoke the Union into attacking prematurely. Butler took the bait. He ordered a night march and coordinated an assault on both Confederate positions. The plan was ambitious, but flawed. The troops were green. The terrain was unfamiliar. And the orders were unclear. The night march. On the night of June 9, Union forces, about 3,500 men, began their march. They were divided into columns, converging from Camp Hamilton and Fort Monroe. Their goal: surprise the Confederates at dawn. But disaster struck before they even reached the enemy. One Union regiment, the 3rd New York Infantry, wore gray uniforms, similar to Confederate colors. Another regiment, the 7th New York, mistook them for the enemy and opened fire. 2 Union soldiers were killed. 19 were wounded. It was a tragic case of friendly fire, and a grim omen of what was to come. The battle begins. At 5 a.m., Union forces reached Big Bethel. Magruder's men, about 1,400 strong, were dug in behind earthworks, with artillery positioned to sweep the field. Union troops advanced across open ground, exposed to cannon and musket fire. The assault faltered. Confusion reigned. Units became separated. Orders were lost in the smoke. Major Theodore Winthrop, a brilliant young officer and writer, led a charge on the Confederate left. He was shot through the heart and died instantly, one of the first prominent Union officers to fall. Lieutenant John T. Grebel, the first regular Army officer killed in the war, was struck by artillery while directing Union guns. By mid-morning, the Union attack collapsed. The troops retreated in disarray. Casualties. The Battle of Big Bethel was small in scale, but devastating in its symbolism. Union casualties: 18 killed, 53 wounded, 5 missing, including Major Theodore Winthrop and Lieutenant John T. Grebel. Confederate casualties: 1 killed, 7 wounded. The South had held its ground. The North had stumbled. Aftermath. The defeat at Big Bethel shocked the Union. Newspapers criticized Butler for not leading the attack himself. The plan had been too complex, the troops too inexperienced, and the execution fatally flawed. Magruder, though outnumbered, had won a propaganda victory. His defense of Big Bethel was hailed across the South as proof that Confederate soldiers could stand against the Union Army. The battle also exposed the North's lack of coordination, discipline, and battlefield experience. It was a wake-up call. The war would not be won with enthusiasm alone. Historical impact. First major land engagement in Virginia. First regular Army officer killed, Lieutenant Grebel. First prominent Union officer killed, Winthrop. First friendly fire incident of the war. First Confederate tactical victory. Big Bethel was a lesson in humility. It showed that courage without clarity leads to chaos. It reminded both sides that war is not just about numbers, it's about leadership, terrain, and timing. At Big Bethel, the Union learned that war is not a parade. It isn't very clear. It is a loss. It is the sound of friendly fire in the dark. And it was only the beginning, the shattering illusion, the first battle of Bull Run, Manassas. They came to watch a spectacle. They left running for their lives. Date: July 21, 1861. Location: Prince William County, Virginia, near Manassas Junction. Time of battle: began around 6:30 a.m., lasted until late afternoon. Result: decisive Confederate victory. It was a Sunday morning. The air was warm, the skies clear. Families packed picnic baskets and rode out from Washington in carriages, eager to witness what they believed would be the final act of a short rebellion. But war does not perform on cue. And Bull Run would shatter every illusion. The setup. 3 months after Fort Sumter, pressure mounted on President Lincoln to strike the Confederacy. The public demanded action. Politicians insisted the Union Army march on Richmond, the Confederate capital, and end the war swiftly. Commanding the Union forces was Brigadier General Irvin McDowell, leading the Army of Northeastern Virginia, about 35,000 men, most of them Green volunteers. Opposing him were Confederate Generals P.G.T. Beauregard and Joseph E. Johnston, commanding a combined force of roughly 32,000, also largely inexperienced. The battlefield was centered around a small stream called Bull Run, near the town of Manassas. The Union plan was to feint at the Confederate front and launch a flanking attack on their left. But delays, confusion, and poor coordination plagued the operation from the start. The battle begins. At 6:30 a.m., Union artillery opened fire. The initial assault pushed back Confederate forces under Colonel Nathan Evans, who fell back toward Henry House Hill. For a moment, it seemed the Union might break through. But reinforcements arrived. General Thomas J. Jackson, commanding a brigade of Virginians, took position on the hill. His men stood firm under relentless fire. Watching them, Confederate General Barnard B. shouted, "There stands Jackson like a stone wall." The name stuck. Stonewall Jackson was born. Union troops launched repeated assaults on the hill. The fighting was brutal. Smoke choked the air. The wounded screamed. The dead lay in heaps. But Jackson's line held. By mid-afternoon, Confederate cavalry under J.E.B. Stuart flanked the Union right. Beauregard ordered a full counterattack. The Confederate line surged forward, screaming the infamous rebel yell. The Union line broke. The panic. What followed was not a retreat, it was a rout. Union soldiers fled in chaos. Wagons overturned. Horses bolted. Civilians who had come to watch the battle were caught in the stampede. Congressmen, journalists, and families ran for their lives. The road back to Washington was littered with abandoned rifles, shattered carriages, and discarded uniforms. The Union Army had collapsed. Casualties. The First Battle of Bull Run was the bloodiest battle in American history up to that point. Union casualties: 481 killed, 1,011 wounded, 1,216 missing or captured. Total, 2,708. Confederate casualties: 387 killed, 1,582 wounded, 13 missing. Total, 1,982. Among the dead was Judith Henry, an elderly woman who refused to leave her home on Henry House Hill. She was killed when Union artillery struck her house, one of the first civilian deaths of the war. Aftermath. Bull Run shattered the North's belief in a quick victory. The war would not be over in weeks. It would be long, bloody, and brutal. Lincoln replaced McDowell with General George B. McClellan, who began organizing the Army of the Potomac. The South, emboldened, believed its independence was within reach. But both sides now understood, this was not a rebellion. It was a war. Historical impact. First major battle of the Civil War. Birth of Stonewall Jackson's legend. First large-scale panic and retreat. First civilian death, Judith Henry. First realization that the war would be long. Bull Run was a wake-up call. It stripped away the romance of war and revealed its true face: confusion, terror, and death. The picnic was over. The war had begun. And Bull Run would echo through every battlefield that followed. The thunder in the Ozarks, the Battle of Wilson's Creek. The frontier was no longer quiet. Missouri had chosen its fate. Date: August 10, 1861. Location: near Springfield, Missouri. Time of battle: began at 5 a.m., ended around 11 a.m. Result: tactical Confederate victory, strategic Union success. The war had already bled into Virginia. But now, the thunder rolled west. In the hills of Missouri, where the Ozarks rise and the rivers twist, the first great battle of the Trans-Mississippi Theater would be fought. And a Union general would fall. The setup. Missouri was a border state, divided in loyalty, rich in resources, and strategically vital. The Union needed it. The Confederacy wanted it. And both sides were willing to fight for it. Union Brigadier General Nathaniel Lyon, a fiery abolitionist and aggressive commander, had taken control of Springfield with about 5,400 men. Opposing him were Confederate Brigadier General Ben McCulloch and Missouri State Guard Commander Sterling Price, leading a combined force of over 12,000. Lyon knew he was outnumbered. But he refused to wait. On the night of August 9, he split his army into two columns. One led by himself. The other by Colonel Franz Sigel. Their plan: surprise the Confederates at dawn and crush them before they could organize. The battle begins. At 5 a.m., Lyon's column struck the Confederate camp near Wilson's Creek, about 10 miles southwest of Springfield. The attack was swift and brutal. Confederate cavalry was driven back. Lyon's men seized the high ground, later called Bloody Hill. But the Confederates rallied. Price and McCulloch launched 3 counterattacks throughout the morning. The fighting was fierce. Smoke filled the trees. The wounded cried out. The creek ran red. Sigel's column, attacking from the south, initially succeeded, but mistook Confederate troops for Union reinforcements. They were routed. Sigel's men fled in confusion. Lyon, wounded twice already, refused to leave the field. He rode forward to rally his men, and was shot through the heart. He died instantly. Major Samuel D. Sturgis took command. By 11 a.m., with ammunition low and troops exhausted, he ordered a retreat to Springfield. Casualties. Wilson's Creek was the second bloodiest battle of 1861, and the first major clash west of the Mississippi. Union casualties: 285 killed, 873 wounded, 186 missing. Total, 1,344. Confederate casualties: 277 killed, 945 wounded. Total, 1,222. Among the dead was General Nathaniel Lyon, the first Union general killed in the war. His death shocked the North and made him a martyr for the Union cause. Aftermath. Though the Confederates held the field, they were too disorganized to pursue. Lyon's aggressive tactics had prevented a Confederate advance into central Missouri. The Union retained control of the state. Missouri would remain in the Union for the rest of the war, though guerrilla warfare and internal conflict would plague it for years. The battle also elevated Sterling Price, who would lead the Missouri State Guard in future campaigns. And it exposed the challenges of coordination between Confederate commanders. McCulloch and Price clashed repeatedly over strategy. Historical impact. First major battle west of the Mississippi. First Union general killed, Nathaniel Lyon. Missouri's fate sealed for the Union. Rise of guerrilla warfare in the West. Wilson's Creek was a turning point. It showed that the war would not be confined to the East. It would rage across plains, rivers, and mountains. And it would claim leaders as well as soldiers. In the hills of Missouri, the war found its voice. It spoke in cannon fire, in the cry of wounded men, and in the silence that followed Lyon's last breath. The frontier was no longer quiet. The war had come. The river ran red, the Battle of Ball's Bluff. A bluff too steep, a river too wide, and a command too broken. Date: October 21, 1861. Location: Loudoun County, Virginia, near Leesburg. Time of battle: began at dawn, ended at dusk. Result: Confederate victory. The Potomac had seen skirmishes. But this was different. This was chaos. This was death by misjudgment. And this was the moment when war and politics collided. The miscalculation. It began with a mistake. A Union scouting party, led by Captain Chase Philbrick, crossed the Potomac River from Harrison's Island on the night of October 20. In the moonlight, Philbrick mistook a line of trees for Confederate tents and reported an unguarded camp. Brigadier General Charles Pomeroy Stone, acting on this faulty intelligence, ordered Colonel Charles Devens to attack at dawn. Devens crossed with a small force, but quickly realized the camp was just forest. Still, Stone ordered him to press forward. The crossing. Reinforcements were slow. Only 4 small boats were available to ferry troops across the river. The process was agonizing. Men arrived piecemeal. There was no unified command. And the bluff above the river was steep, nearly 100 feet high. Colonel Edward Dickinson Baker, a sitting U.S. Senator and close friend of President Lincoln, took command. But Baker never established control. He remained on the Maryland side, searching for boats, while chaos unfolded across the river. The battle unfolds. By midday, Confederate Colonel Nathan Shanks Evans had organized his defense. His men, Mississippians and Virginians, engaged the scattered Union forces in the woods above the bluff. Baker finally crossed the river around 4 p.m. Within minutes, he was shot and killed. His death shattered Union morale. At dusk, fresh Confederate troops arrived. The 17th Mississippi Infantry charged. The Union line broke. Soldiers panicked. Many fled down the bluff, trying to swim the river. Some drowned. Others were shot in the water. Hundreds surrendered. Casualties. The Union suffered devastating losses. Union casualties: 223 killed. 226 wounded. 553 captured. Total: 1,002 out of 1,720 men. Confederate casualties: 36 killed. 264 wounded. 3 captured. Total: 303. It was a rout. And it was political dynamite. Aftermath. The death of Senator Baker sent shockwaves through Washington. Congress was outraged. The Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War was formed, a powerful body that would investigate generals, interfere with strategy, and fuel years of political infighting. General Stone, blamed for the disaster, was arrested without charges and held for 6 months. His career never recovered. The battle also exposed the Union's lack of coordination, poor logistics, and dangerous reliance on political appointees. Historical impact. First major Union defeat after Bull Run. Death of a sitting U.S. Senator in combat. Creation of the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War. Rise of political interference in military affairs. Ball's Bluff was small in scale, but massive in consequence. It showed that the war would not be won by bravery alone. It would require leadership, logistics, and unity. The river ran red. The bluff was steep. And the war had claimed not just soldiers, but senators. The Potomac would never be the same. The Siege of Caution, the Peninsula Campaign. He had the men. He had the plan. But he didn't have the nerve. Date: March to July 1862. Location: Virginia Peninsula, between the York and James Rivers. Result: Confederate victory. The Army of the Potomac was reborn. Trained, equipped, and ready. Its commander, George B. McClellan, promised swift victory. But the road to Richmond was long, and the enemy was watching. The grand strategy. After the disaster at Bull Run, President Lincoln needed a new plan. He turned to Major General George B. McClellan, a brilliant organizer but a cautious field commander. McClellan proposed an amphibious flanking maneuver, sailed the Army of the Potomac to Fort Monroe, then marched northwest up the Virginia Peninsula toward Richmond, the Confederate capital. Lincoln approved. In March 1862, over 100,000 Union troops landed at Fort Monroe. It was the largest amphibious operation in American history up to that point. The Siege of Yorktown. McClellan expected light resistance. Instead, he found General John B. Magruder entrenched along the Warwick Line, using theatrics and deception to exaggerate his numbers. McClellan, convinced he was outnumbered, halted and began siege preparations. For a month, his army dug trenches and positioned artillery. On May 3, the Confederates withdrew. McClellan had wasted precious time. Battle of Williamsburg. As the Confederates retreated, McClellan pursued. On May 5, Union forces clashed with the rear guard at Williamsburg. The battle was bloody but inconclusive. McClellan claimed victory, but the Confederates escaped again. Drury's Bluff and the James River. The Union Navy attempted to reach Richmond via the James River. On May 15, they were stopped at Drury's Bluff, where Confederate artillery dominated the high ground. The river route was closed. McClellan had to march. Battle of Seven Pines, Fair Oaks. By late May, McClellan's army was near Richmond. But it was split by the Chickahominy River, swollen by rain. Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston attacked on May 31, hoping to crush the isolated Union Corps. The battle was chaotic. Johnston was wounded. Command passed to Robert E. Lee. McClellan held his ground, but failed to counterattack. The 7 Days Battles. Lee, now in command, launched a series of aggressive attacks from June 25 to July 1. Battle of Mechanicsville, June 26. Battle of Gaines Mill, June 27. Savage's Station, June 29. Fraser's Farm, June 30. Malvern Hill, July 1. McClellan, unnerved by Lee's boldness, began a retreat to the James River. At Malvern Hill, Union artillery devastated Lee's assault, but McClellan still withdrew. Casualties. The Peninsula Campaign was costly. Union casualties: over 23,000. Confederate casualties: over 29,000. Despite higher Confederate losses, Lee had saved Richmond. McClellan's campaign had failed. Aftermath. McClellan blamed Washington for withholding reinforcements. Lincoln blamed McClellan for hesitation. Their relationship soured. Lee emerged as the Confederacy's new hero. He had taken command and turned the tide. The Union's grand offensive had collapsed. Richmond remained unconquered. Historical impact. First large-scale Union offensive in the East. Rise of Robert E. Lee. McClellan's reputation was damaged. Shift from siege warfare to maneuver warfare. The Peninsula Campaign was a lesson in missed opportunity. McClellan had the numbers, the plan, and the moment. But he lacked the aggression to finish it. The Peninsula was quiet again. The trenches were empty. The guns were silent. And Richmond still stood. The war would go on. The reckoning at Manassas, Second Battle of Bull Run. He promised victory. Lee delivered defeat. Date: August 28 to 30, 1862. Location: Manassas, Virginia. Result: decisive Confederate victory. The fields of Manassas had already tasted blood. Now, they would drink deeper. The Union returned with a new general. But the ghosts of Bull Run were waiting. The setup. After McClellan's failure on the Peninsula, Lincoln turned to Major General John Pope, a brash, boastful commander from the Western Theater. He was given the newly formed Army of Virginia, tasked with protecting Washington and threatening Richmond from the north. Pope promised aggressive action. He mocked McClellan's caution and declared his headquarters would be in the saddle. Confederate soldiers joked that most people kept their hindquarters there. But Pope's confidence would soon meet Lee's cunning. Lee's gambit. General Robert E. Lee, fresh from defending Richmond, saw an opportunity. He split his army. Stonewall Jackson took 24,000 men on a daring march around Pope's flank to cut his supply lines. James Longstreet followed with 28,000 men, moving to reunite with Jackson. On August 27, Jackson captured the Union supply depot at Manassas Junction, burning tons of supplies and drawing Pope into a trap. The clash begins. August 28, Jackson attacked a Union column at Bronner's Farm to lure Pope into battle. August 29, Pope launched repeated assaults against Jackson's position along an unfinished railroad grade. The attacks were brave, but poorly coordinated. Jackson held firm. Lee and Longstreet arrived late that day. Pope, unaware of Longstreet's presence, prepared for another attack. August 30, the decisive blow. Pope ordered a massive assault on Jackson's line. Longstreet, now fully deployed, counterattacked with 28,000 men, the largest simultaneous Confederate assault of the war. The Union left flank collapsed. Soldiers fled toward Centerville. The retreat was chaotic. Artillery was abandoned. Units dissolved. Casualties. The battle was devastating. Union casualties: 1,700 killed. 11,000 wounded or missing. Total: 12,700. Confederate casualties: 1,300 killed. 7,000 wounded. Total: 8,300. The Union Army was driven from northern Virginia. Pope's reputation was shattered. Aftermath. Pope blamed McClellan for failing to reinforce him. McClellan blamed Pope's recklessness. Lincoln, disillusioned, restored McClellan to command, despite his flaws. Lee, emboldened, prepared to invade the North. The road to Antietam was opening. The Second Battle of Bull Run was a Confederate masterpiece, and a Union catastrophe. Historical impact. Lee's first strategic offensive succeeds. Union morale plummets. McClellan returns to command. Confederate momentum builds toward Maryland. Bull Run had spoken again. And its voice was cruel. The fields of Manassas were quiet once more. But the silence was not peace. It was the breath before the next storm, the bloodiest day. The sun rose on hope. It set on horror. Date: September 17, 1862. Location: Sharpsburg, Maryland, near Antietam Creek. Result: tactical stalemate, strategic Union victory. The fields of Maryland were quiet. But beneath the soil, armies moved. Lee had crossed the Potomac. McClellan had the plans. And the dawn would bring the bloodiest day in American history. The Maryland Campaign. After his victory at Second Bull Run, General Robert E. Lee invaded the North. His goals: win foreign recognition for the Confederacy, influence upcoming midterm elections, relieve pressure on Virginia, liberate Maryland, a border state with divided loyalties. Lee's army entered Maryland on September 4, 1862. But fate intervened. Union soldiers discovered Special Order 191, Lee's battle plans, wrapped around cigars in a field. General George B. McClellan now knew Lee's movements. He had the advantage. But he waited 18 hours before acting. The battle begins. At dawn on September 17, McClellan launched his attack. Phase I, the cornfield. General Joseph Hooker's I Corps struck Lee's left flank. Fighting raged in Miller's cornfield, where men fired blindly through smoke and stalks. Units were shattered. The ground changed hands 15 times. Phase II, the Dunker Church. Hooker was wounded. General Edwin Sumner's II Corps attacked next. Fighting swirled around the Dunker Church, a small white chapel that became a symbol of carnage. Phase III, the Sunken Road. Union forces assaulted the Confederate center, entrenched in a worn wagon path, later called Bloody Lane. After hours of slaughter, the Union broke through, but failed to exploit the gap. Phase IV, Burnside's Bridge. On the southern flank, General Ambrose Burnside struggled to cross a narrow stone bridge. Confederate sharpshooters held the high ground. After 3 hours, Burnside broke through, only to be counterattacked by A.P. Hill's division, arriving from Harper's Ferry. Casualties. Antietam remains the bloodiest single day in American military history. Union casualties: 2,108 killed, 9,549 wounded, 753 missing. Total: 12,410. Confederate casualties: 1,567 killed, 7,752 wounded, 1,018 missing. Total: 10,337. Over 22,000 men fell in 12 hours. The fields were soaked in blood. The air reeked of gunpowder and death. Aftermath. Lee retreated to Virginia on September 18. McClellan did not pursue. Lincoln was furious. But the battle gave Lincoln what he needed, a Union victory to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, which he announced 5 days later. It transformed the war, from a fight to preserve the Union into a crusade to end slavery. Historical impact. Bloodiest day in U.S. history. Lee's first invasion of the North repelled. Emancipation Proclamation announced. Foreign powers, Britain, France, withheld recognition of the Confederacy. Antietam was not decisive on the field. But it was decisive in history. The creek ran quietly again. But the echoes remained. In the cornfield. In the church. In the lane. And in the hearts of a nation forever changed. The Wall of Fire, the Battle of Fredericksburg. They marched into legend. And into death. Date, December 11 to 15, 1862. Location, Fredericksburg, Virginia. Result, crushing Confederate victory. The Rappahannock River was cold. The town was quiet. But behind the hills, Lee waited. And Burnside marched toward disaster. The plan. After Antietam, Lincoln replaced McClellan with Major General Ambrose Burnside. Burnside, reluctant but obedient, devised a bold plan, race to Fredericksburg, cross the Rappahannock River, and seize Richmond before Lee could react. But the plan depended on speed, and the pontoon bridges needed to cross the river were delayed by bureaucracy. Burnside arrived at Falmouth in mid-November. The bridges didn't arrive until December 11. Lee used the delay to fortify the heights west of Fredericksburg. His army, led by James Longstreet and Stonewall Jackson, dug in along Marye's Heights, behind a stone wall and artillery batteries. Urban combat. On December 11, Union engineers began building pontoon bridges under fire. Confederate sharpshooters in Fredericksburg resisted fiercely. Burnside ordered artillery to shell the town, the first instance of urban combat in the Civil War. By nightfall, Union troops crossed the river and occupied the city. But the real battle was yet to come. December 13, the assault. Burnside ordered a series of frontal attacks against Marye's Heights. His generals protested. The terrain was open. The Confederate position was impregnable. But Burnside insisted. Wave after wave of Union soldiers marched across open ground, 600 yards of frozen field, toward the stone wall. Confederate infantry, protected and elevated, fired with deadly precision. Artillery rained down from the heights. Some Union units managed to reach within 50 yards. None broke through. One Confederate soldier described it as target practice. A Union officer called it murder, casualties. Fredericksburg was one of the most one-sided battles of the war. Union casualties: 1,284 killed, 9,600 wounded, 1,769 missing/captured. Total, 12,653. Confederate casualties: 608 killed, 4,116 wounded, 653 missing/captured. Total, 5,377. The Union suffered more than twice the losses of the Confederates. And gained nothing. Aftermath. Burnside was devastated. He attempted another assault on December 15, but his generals refused. The army withdrew across the river. Morale plummeted. Lincoln was shaken. Burnside was relieved of command weeks later. Lee's reputation soared. He had held firm against overwhelming numbers. Historical impact. First urban combat of the Civil War. Most lopsided Union defeat to date. Burnside's career was shattered. Lee's defensive genius confirmed. Fredericksburg was a lesson in leadership, and its failure. It showed that courage alone could not overcome terrain, tactics, and entrenched firepower. The stone wall still stands. And beneath it, the echoes of thousands who marched into fire. Fredericksburg was not a battle. It was a reckoning, the high-water mark, the Battle of Gettysburg. They came for victory. They left with silence. Date, July 1 to 3, 1863. Location, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Result, Union victory. The fields were green. The sky was clear. And the armies of North and South converged once more. Gettysburg would not be a battle. It would be a reckoning. The invasion. After Chancellorsville, General Robert E. Lee launched his second invasion of the North. His goals: relieve pressure on Virginia, feed his army from northern farms, win a decisive victory on Union soil, force peace talks or foreign recognition. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, up to 75,000 strong, moved into Pennsylvania. The Union responded with the Army of the Potomac, now under General George G. Meade, newly appointed just days before the battle. Day 1, July 1, 1863. Confederate forces clashed with Union cavalry under General John Buford west of Gettysburg. Reinforcements arrived. By afternoon, General A. P. Hill and Richard Ewell pushed Union troops through the town to Cemetery Hill. Lee had the advantage, but failed to press it. The Union held the high ground. Day 2, July 2, 1863. Lee attacked both flanks. Longstreet struck the Union left at Little Round Top, Devil's Den, and the Wheatfield. Ewell assaulted the Union right at Culp's Hill and East Cemetery Hill. The fighting was ferocious. Union Colonel Joshua Chamberlain and the 20th Maine held Little Round Top with a desperate bayonet charge. Despite gains, the Union line held. Day 3, July 3, 1863. Lee gambled everything on a frontal assault, Pickett's charge. At 3 p.m., 12,500 Confederate soldiers marched across open fields toward Cemetery Ridge. Union artillery and infantry tore them apart. Few reached the stone wall. None broke through. Pickett's division was shattered. Lee's gamble had failed. Casualties. Gettysburg was the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. Union casualties: 3,155 killed, 14,531 wounded, 5,369 missing/captured. Total: 23,055. Confederate casualties: 3,903 killed, 18,735 wounded, 5,425 missing/captured. Total: 28,063. Over 51,000 men fell in 3 days. Aftermath. Lee retreated to Virginia on July 4, the same day Vicksburg fell in the West. The twin Union victories marked the turning point of the war. Lee would never again invade the North. The Confederacy was now on the defensive. 4 months later, Lincoln returned to Gettysburg to dedicate a cemetery. His Gettysburg Address redefined the war's purpose, a new birth of freedom. Historical impact. Turning point of the Civil War. Lee's last offensive. Union morale revived. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address immortalized. Gettysburg was more than a battle. It was a symbol of sacrifice, of resolve, of a nation struggling to be reborn. The hills still stand. The stone wall still waits. And the echoes of Pickett's charge still whisper through the fields. Gettysburg was the high-water mark. And the tide had turned. The river falls, the siege of Vicksburg. The city held. The river waited. And Grant never blinked. Date: May 18 to July 4, 1863. Location: Vicksburg, Mississippi. Result: decisive Union victory. The Mississippi was the spine of a continent. Control it, and you split the South in two. Vicksburg was the key. And Grant had come to claim it. The campaign begins. Major General Ulysses S. Grant had tried and failed to take Vicksburg for months. The city sat on high bluffs, protected by rivers, swamps, and Confederate guns. But Grant was relentless. In April 1863, he launched a bold maneuver. Crossed the Mississippi south of Vicksburg. Marched inland, cutting loose from supply lines. Won a string of battles: Port Gibson, Raymond, Jackson, Champion Hill, and Big Black River Bridge. By May 18, Grant had driven General John C. Pemberton and his 33,000 Confederate troops into Vicksburg's defenses. The siege. Grant tried 2 direct assaults, on May 19 and May 22. Both failed with heavy losses. So he dug in. Trenches crept closer each day. Artillery pounded the city. Union sharpshooters picked off defenders. Civilians hid in caves carved into hillsides. Food ran out. Horses, dogs, and rats became meals. Disease spread. Morale collapsed. The siege lasted 47 days. Casualties. Union casualties: 766 killed, 3,793 wounded, 276 missing. Total: 4,835. Confederate casualties: 3,202 killed/wounded/missing. 29,495 surrendered. Total: 32,697. Grant captured 172 cannons and split the Confederacy in two. July 4, the surrender. On Independence Day, Pemberton surrendered. Grant offered generous terms. The Union now controlled the entire Mississippi River. 5 days later, Port Hudson fell. The Confederacy's western states, Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana, were cut off. Lincoln said, "The Father of Waters again goes on vexed to the sea." Historical impact. Union gains full control of the Mississippi River. Confederacy split in two. Grant's reputation skyrockets. Turning point in the Western theater. Vicksburg was not just a victory. It was a fracture. The Confederacy would never fully recover. The river flowed on. The guns fell silent. And the city surrendered not just its walls, but its place in history, the River of Death, the Battle of Chickamauga. The forest whispered. The lines broke. And the South roared one last time. Date, September 18 to 20th, 1863. Location, northern Georgia, near Chickamauga Creek. Result, Confederate victory. The Western theater had been quiet. But now, the trees would tremble. The Union marched toward Chattanooga. And Bragg waited in the woods. The setup. After the fall of Vicksburg, Union General William Rosecrans pressed into Georgia, aiming to seize Chattanooga, a vital rail hub. His Army of the Cumberland forced Confederate General Braxton Bragg to abandon the city. But Bragg wasn't done. Reinforced by James Longstreet's corps from Virginia, Bragg planned a counterattack near Chickamauga Creek, a name that would soon mean River of Death. The terrain. The battlefield was a tangled forest. Visibility was poor. Units became disoriented. Commanders struggled to coordinate. It was chaos, pure and bloody. Day 1, September 19. Skirmishes erupted as both armies scrambled for position. Bragg launched piecemeal attacks. Rosecrans held firm. The fighting was intense but inconclusive. Day 2, September 20th. Bragg reorganized overnight. He placed Longstreet in charge of the Confederate left and ordered a massive assault. Meanwhile, a Union staff error created a gap in the line. Longstreet's men struck precisely at that point, a perfect storm of timing and terrain. The Union center collapsed. Soldiers fled. Rosecrans retreated to Chattanooga. But one man stood firm, General George H. Thomas, who rallied broken units on Snodgrass Hill and held off repeated attacks. His stand earned him the nickname, the Rock of Chickamauga. Casualties. Chickamauga was the second bloodiest battle of the Civil War. Union casualties: 1,657 killed, 9,756 wounded, 4,757 missing/captured. Total, 16,170. Confederate casualties: 2,312 killed, 14,674 wounded, 1,468 missing/captured. Total, 18,454. Over 34,000 men fell in 2 days. Aftermath. Bragg had won, but failed to pursue. The Union retreated to Chattanooga and fortified the city. Bragg laid siege. But Union reinforcements arrived, led by Ulysses S. Grant. Within weeks, the tables would turn again. Chickamauga was the last great Confederate victory in the West. And it came at a terrible cost. Historical impact. Second bloodiest battle of the war. Confederate tactical victory, strategic failure. Rise of George Thomas as a Union hero. Set the stage for the battles for Chattanooga. Chickamauga was a forest of fire. A river of death. And a moment when the South roared loudest, before the silence came. The woods still whisper. The creek still flows. And the name Chickamauga still echoes with the cries of thousands. It was a victory. And it was ruin. The battle above the clouds, Chattanooga. They climbed through mist. They fought through the fog. And they shattered the siege. Date, November 23 to 25, 1863. Location, Chattanooga, Tennessee. Result, decisive Union victory. The Confederates had won at Chickamauga. But the Union held Chattanooga. And Grant had arrived. The siege would not last. The mountains would not hold. The setup. After the Union defeat at Chickamauga, General William Rosecrans retreated to Chattanooga, a vital rail hub on the Tennessee River. Confederate General Braxton Bragg laid siege, hoping to starve the Union into surrender. Lincoln sent Ulysses S. Grant, now commander of all Western forces. Grant replaced Rosecrans with George H. Thomas, the Rock of Chickamauga, and began to break the siege. The key was the Cracker Line, a new supply route opened in late October. With food and ammunition flowing again, Grant prepared to strike. November 23, Orchard Knob. Grant ordered Thomas to probe the Confederate center. Thomas's men surged forward and seized Orchard Knob, a small hill between the city and Missionary Ridge. It was meant to be a demonstration. It became a foothold. November 24, Lookout Mountain. Major General Joseph Hooker attacked the Confederate right at Lookout Mountain, a towering peak shrouded in fog. The battle became legendary. Union troops fought uphill through mist and smoke. The scene was surreal, soldiers vanishing into clouds, gunfire echoing through the haze. By afternoon, Hooker's men had taken the mountain. It became known as the Battle Above the Clouds. November 25, Missionary Ridge. Grant ordered a coordinated assault. Sherman attacked the Confederate left at Tunnel Hill, but was repulsed. Hooker advanced from Lookout Mountain. Thomas was ordered to demonstrate at the center. But Thomas's men didn't stop at the demonstration. They surged up Missionary Ridge, a steep, fortified slope. Confederate fire rained down, but the Union kept climbing. The assault was spontaneous, unplanned, and unstoppable. By sunset, the ridge was taken. Bragg's army fled into Georgia. Casualties. Union casualties: 753 killed, 4,722 wounded, 349 missing. Total, 5,824. Confederate casualties: 361 killed, 2,160 wounded, 4,146 missing/captured. Total, 6,667. The siege was broken. The South was split. And the Union held the gateway to Georgia. Aftermath. Chattanooga became a Union stronghold, the launch pad for Sherman's Atlanta campaign and his march to the sea. Bragg resigned. Confederate morale plummeted. Grant's reputation soared. Within months, he would be called east to take command of all Union armies. Historical impact. Union control of Chattanooga secured. Gateway to the Deep South opened. Grant's rise to supreme command. Sherman's path to Atlanta cleared. Chattanooga was more than a victory. It was a transformation. The West was now Union territory. And the war's momentum had shifted. The clouds lifted. The ridge was silent. And the Union flag flew high above the mountains. Chattanooga had spoken. And the South had listened. Fire in the forest, the battle of the wilderness. The trees burned. The wounded screamed. And Grant did not turn back. Date: May 5 to 7, 1864. Location: Wilderness of Spotsylvania, Virginia. Result: tactical stalemate, strategic Union advance. The forest was thick. The ground was tangled. And the air was heavy with smoke. Grant had come to fight. Lee had come to stop him. And the wilderness would consume them both. The setup. In spring 1864, Ulysses S. Grant was promoted to General-in-Chief of all Union armies. He chose to fight in Virginia, alongside George Meade's Army of the Potomac, and take the war to Robert E. Lee. Grant's plan: push south toward Richmond, destroy Lee's army, and end the war. Lee's plan: strike first, use the terrain, and bleed Grant's forces in the tangled woods of the wilderness, a dense, fire-prone forest west of Fredericksburg. May 5, the clash begins. Union forces collided with Lee's army on the Orange Turnpike and Orange Plank Road. The terrain was brutal, thick underbrush, poor visibility, and no room for maneuver. Fighting was chaotic. Units became lost. Commanders couldn't see their own lines. Muskets flashed in the shadows. Trees caught fire. Wounded men were burned alive. May 6, the Inferno. At dawn, Winfield Scott Hancock's II Corps launched a massive assault on the Confederate right. They drove A.P. Hill's corps back in confusion. But James Longstreet's corps arrived just in time. He counterattacked with a brilliant flanking maneuver, using an unfinished railroad bed to surprise Hancock. The Union line buckled. But Longstreet was accidentally shot by his own men. The momentum stalled. Later that day, John B. Gordon attacked the Union right. The line bent, but did not break. May 7, the decision. Both sides held their ground. The forest was littered with the dead. Fires still smoldered. The battle was a draw. But Grant made history. Instead of retreating like his predecessors, he ordered the army to march south, toward Spotsylvania. The war had changed. Grant would not turn back. Casualties. The wilderness was savage. Union casualties: 2,246 killed, 12,037 wounded, 3,383 missing/captured. Total: 17,666. Confederate casualties: 1,477 killed, 7,866 wounded, 1,690 missing/captured. Total: 11,033. Nearly 29,000 men fell in 3 days. Aftermath. The Wilderness was the opening of Grant's overland campaign, a brutal series of battles that would grind Lee's army down. Lee had stopped Grant, but not turned him. The Union Army kept moving. The war was now one of attrition. Historical impact. First clash between Grant and Lee. Start of the Overland Campaign. Grant's refusal to retreat changed Union strategy. War of maneuver replaced by war of attrition. The Wilderness was not a victory. It was a statement. The Union would fight. And it would not stop. The forest still burns in memory. The screams still echo in silence. And the road south still waits. Grant had entered the Wilderness. And he would not leave until the war was done. The Bloody Angle, the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. They fought in the rain. They drowned in blood. And the earth could not forget. Date, May 8 to 21, 1864. Location, Spotsylvania County, Virginia. Result, tactical stalemate, strategic Union advance. The Wilderness had burned. But Grant did not stop. He moved south. Lee raced to block him. And the sleepy hamlet of Spotsylvania became a slaughterhouse. The setup. After the Battle of the Wilderness, Ulysses S. Grant continued his march toward Richmond. Lee anticipated the move and beat Grant to the crossroads at Spotsylvania Courthouse, entrenching his army in a formidable defensive line. Grant arrived on May 8, and the two armies clashed for nearly 2 weeks. The fighting was constant, shifting, and savage. The Confederate line included a massive salient, a bulge in the earthworks, called the Mule Shoe. It would become the site of the war's most horrifying combat. May 10, Upton's assault. Union Colonel Emory Upton led a daring attack with 12 regiments against the Mule Shoe. His men broke through, but lacked support. The position was retaken. Grant saw potential. He planned a larger assault. May 12, the Bloody Angle. At 4:30 a.m., Winfield Scott Hancock's 2 Corps, 15,000 strong, launched a massive assault on the Mule Shoe. They broke through. Confederate lines buckled. But reinforcements arrived. What followed was 21 hours of hand-to-hand combat in driving rain. Soldiers fought with bayonets, rifle butts, and bare hands. Trenches filled with water and blood. Bodies piled 5 deep. Some wounded men drowned. A tree 17 inches thick was cut down by gunfire alone. It still stands in a museum, scarred and silent. May 13 to 21, the grind continues. Grant tried flanking maneuvers. Lee countered. The lines shifted. The killing never stopped. By May 21, Grant disengaged and moved south again, toward the North Anna River. Casualties. Spotsylvania was one of the costliest battles of the war. Union casualties: 2,725 killed, 13,416 wounded, 2,258 missing/captured. Total, 18,399. Confederate casualties: 1,515 killed, 5,414 wounded, 5,758 missing/captured. Total, 12,687. Nearly 31,000 men fell. And the war ground on. Aftermath. Spotsylvania was a tactical draw, but a strategic Union success. Grant kept moving. Lee could only react. The Overland Campaign continued. The war had become a test of endurance. Historical impact. Most intense combat of the war. Grant's strategy of attrition solidified. Lee's army stretched thin. The Bloody Angle became a symbol of Civil War horror. Spotsylvania was not a battle. It was a nightmare. And it left scars that never healed. The trenches are gone. The trees have regrown. But the Bloody Angle still whispers. Of men who fought. Of men who fell. And of a war that refused to end, the Graveyard Charge, the Battle of Cold Harbor. They pinned their names to their backs. They knew they would not return. Date, May 31 to June 12, 1864. Location, Hanover County, Virginia. Result, decisive Confederate victory. The trenches were deep. The guns were ready. And the Union soldiers wrote their names on scraps of paper, so their bodies could be identified. The setup. After Spotsylvania, Ulysses S. Grant continued his overland campaign, swinging east toward Cold Harbor, a strategic crossroads just 10 miles from Richmond. Confederate General Robert E. Lee, anticipating Grant's move, entrenched his army in a 7-mile line of earthworks, fortified, elevated, and lethal. Grant arrived on May 31. The Union Army numbered over 100,000. Lee had around 60,000. but the terrain favored defense. June 1 to 2, positioning and skirmishes. Union cavalry under Philip Sheridan seized the crossroads. Infantry arrived and probed the Confederate lines. Some attacks met success, but the main defenses held. Grant planned a massive assault for June 3. His goal: break Lee's line and end the war. June 3, the charge. At 4:30 a.m., 3 Union corps surged forward. The fog was thick. The ground was open. The Confederate guns were waiting. Within 8 minutes, thousands of Union soldiers were dead or wounded. The attack stalled. Survivors hugged the earth, unable to retreat or advance. Grant later wrote, "I have always regretted that the last assault at Cold Harbor was ever made." Casualties. Cold Harbor was one of the most lopsided battles of the war. Union casualties: 1,845 killed, 9,077 wounded, 1,816 missing/captured. Total: 12,738. Confederate casualties: 788 killed, 3,376 wounded, 1,123 missing/captured. Total: 5,287. The Union gained no ground. The dead lay and rose. And the war continued. Aftermath. Grant halted further assaults. For 9 days, the Army stared across no man's land. On June 12, Grant disengaged and crossed the James River, a brilliant maneuver that surprised Lee and led to the siege of Petersburg. But Cold Harbor left a scar. It became a symbol of wasted lives, failed tactics, and the brutal cost of war. Historical impact. Last major Confederate victory of the war. Grant's reputation was briefly tarnished. Union soldiers began questioning leadership. Set the stage for the siege of Petersburg. Cold Harbor was not a battle. It was a graveyard. And its silence still speaks. The names were pinned to backs. The trenches were never breached. And the fields of Cold Harbor became a place where hope went to die. The earth trembles. The siege of Petersburg. They tunneled through silence. They exploded into madness. And the war dug in. Date: June 9, 1864, April 2, 1865. Location: Petersburg, Virginia. Result: Union victory. The road to Richmond was blocked. The rail lines ran through Petersburg. And Grant had one goal: cut Lee off, starve him out, and end the war. The setup. After Cold Harbor, Ulysses S. Grant executed a brilliant maneuver, crossing the James River and surprising Lee by attacking Petersburg, the last major supply hub for Richmond. But the city was defended. Lee's army entrenched. And the siege began. This wasn't a classic siege. It was trench warfare, a grim foreshadowing of World War I. The line stretched over 30 miles, from Richmond to the outskirts of Petersburg. June to July 1864, the early battles. Grant launched repeated assaults. Lee repelled them. The Union dug in. The Confederates countered. The war became static, brutal, and exhausting. Then came a bold idea, from the 48th Pennsylvania Infantry, made up of coal miners. July 30, the Battle of the Crater. Union troops dug a 511-foot tunnel beneath Confederate lines and packed it with 8,000 pounds of gunpowder. At 4:44 a.m., the mine exploded. The blast killed hundreds and created a crater 170 feet wide and 30 feet deep. But the follow-up attack was a disaster. Union troops charged into the crater, only to be trapped. Confederate forces fired down into the pit. It was a massacre. Union casualties, 3,800. Confederate casualties, 1,500. The crater became a symbol of mismanagement and missed opportunity. The long siege. For 9 months, Grant extended his lines, cutting off railroads and supply routes. Lee's army grew weaker. Desertion increased. Food ran out. Meanwhile, African American troops played a major role, fighting bravely at battles like Chaffin's Farm, despite suffering heavy losses. April 2, 1865, the breakthrough. Grant launched a final assault. Union forces broke through at multiple points. Lee ordered a retreat. Petersburg fell. Richmond was evacuated. The road to Appomattox was open. Casualties. The siege of Petersburg was long and costly. Union casualties: 42,000 over 9 months. Confederate casualties: 28,000. It was the final grind. And it broke the Confederacy. Historical impact. Longest military engagement of the Civil War. Foreshadowed trench warfare of World War I. Union victory opened the path to Richmond. Led directly to Lee's surrender. Petersburg was not dramatic. It was relentless. And it ended the war. The trenches are quiet now. The crater is still. And the earth remembers. Petersburg was the last wall. And Grant broke through. Bentonville, the last roar. March 19 to 21, 1865, Bentonville, North Carolina. In the final days of the Civil War, General Joseph E. Johnston gathered a force of approximately 21,900 Confederate soldiers, a mix of infantry, cavalry, and artillery, hoping to halt Sherman's advance through North Carolina. Facing him was Major General William Tecumseh Sherman, commanding a Union army of nearly 60,000 men, divided into two wings. On March 19, at around 9 o'clock in the morning, Union forces under Major General Henry W. Slocum encountered Confederate skirmishers near Cole's Plantation. Mistaking them for cavalry, Slocum advanced. By 11 o'clock, Johnston launched a full assault, routing two Union divisions and nearly breaking the line. Union reinforcements under Brigadier General James D. Morgan arrived by 4:30 in the afternoon, stabilizing the defense at Morris Farm. The day ended with heavy losses on both sides. On March 20, Sherman arrived with Major General Oliver O. Howard's wing, bringing Union strength to full force. Johnston entrenched, and minor skirmishes continued throughout the day. On March 21, at approximately 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Union Major General Joseph A. Moore led an unauthorized attack on the Confederate left flank. His men advanced to within 600 yards of Johnston's headquarters before Sherman ordered a withdrawal at 3 o'clock. That night, Johnston retreated. The battle was over. Casualties at Bentonville. The Union Army suffered 194 killed, 1,112 wounded, and 221 missing or captured, totaling 1,527 casualties. The Confederate Army endured 239 killed, 1,694 wounded, and 673 missing or captured, totaling 2,606 casualties. In total, 4,133 men fell in the pine woods of Bentonville, Appomattox, the surrender of Lee. April 9, 1865, Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. By early April, General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia had been reduced to 28,000 men. Starving, exhausted, and surrounded, Lee attempted to escape west toward Lynchburg. On April 8, Union cavalry blocked his path. At 5 o'clock in the morning on April 9, Lee ordered Major General John B. Gordon to attack Union forces near Appomattox Station. The assault began at 7:30, initially successful, but was halted by overwhelming Union reinforcements. At 9 o'clock, Lee sent a message to General Ulysses S. Grant, requesting terms. The two men met at the McLean House at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. By 4 o'clock, Lee signed the surrender. Casualties at Appomattox, April 9 only. The Union Army suffered 164 killed, 620 wounded, and 25 missing or captured, totaling 809 casualties. The Confederate Army suffered 118 killed, 620 wounded, and over 2,000 captured, totaling approximately 2,738 casualties. The day saw nearly 3,547 men fall in the final clash of Lee's army. Bennett Place, the final surrender. April 17 to 26, 1865, Durham Station, North Carolina. After Bentonville and Appomattox, General Joseph E. Johnston knew the war was lost. He commanded the last major Confederate force in the field, an army of approximately 89,270 men, including troops from North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. On April 17, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Johnston met Sherman at a farmhouse near Durham Station known as Bennett Place. They drafted surrender terms on April 18, but Washington rejected them due to political provisions. On April 26, at 10 o'clock in the morning, Johnston signed unconditional military surrender terms. Casualties at Bennett Place. There were no battle casualties during the surrender. Johnston's army included approximately 60,000 infantry, around 15,000 cavalry, nearly 14,000 artillery and support personnel. This was the largest surrender of Confederate troops in the entire war, the price of Union. 1865 and beyond, a nation reborn, scarred but whole. The American Civil War lasted 4 years, 1 month, and 15 days, from April 12, 1861, when Confederate guns opened fire on Fort Sumter, to April 26, 1865, when General Joseph E. Johnston surrendered the last major Confederate army at Bennett Place. In that time, More than 3 million men had worn the uniform, 2,100,000 for the Union, and 1,064,000 for the Confederacy. The cost was staggering. Human toll. Union deaths. 110,000 killed in battle. 250,000 died of disease. Total Union deaths, 360,000. Confederate deaths. 94,000 killed in battle. 164,000 died of disease. Total Confederate deaths, 258,000. Total deaths, over 618,000 Americans. More Americans died in the Civil War than in World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam combined. Economic and physical destruction. The South lost two-thirds of its wealth. Railroads, factories, and farms were destroyed across Georgia, South Carolina, Mississippi, and Virginia. 4 million formerly enslaved people were freed, but faced poverty, violence, and systemic oppression. Cities like Atlanta, Columbia, and Richmond were reduced to ashes. The Southern economy collapsed. The Northern economy surged, but at the cost of blood and steel. Political legacy. Slavery was abolished with the 13th Amendment, ratified on December 6, 1865. The 14th Amendment, 1868, granted citizenship to all born in the U.S. The 15th Amendment, 1870, guaranteed voting rights regardless of race. But Reconstruction was bitter. The South resisted. The North grew weary. And the promise of equality was delayed for generations. Emotional reckoning. The war left behind widows, orphans, and haunted veterans. It carved scars into the land and the soul of the nation. Over 400,000 Union soldiers returned home wounded. Tens of thousands suffered amputations. Countless others carried invisible wounds, grief, trauma, and loss. Families were torn apart. Brothers fought brothers. Towns buried their sons. And yet, from the ashes, a new nation emerged. The legacy of the Civil War. It preserved the Union. It ended slavery. It redefined citizenship, freedom, and nationhood. But it also left behind a century of struggle, Jim Crow, segregation, and the long fight for civil rights. The war is over, Grant had said. The rebels are our countrymen again. But reconciliation would take more than words. It would take generations.